Hi, so the first fly I'm going to tie, this is back in our my sequence of I like old flies. So these are two versions of the Quill Gordon. As I noted, Theodore Gordon was the guy that invented this fly back in the 1890s in the eastern US and the Catskills. So it's a pretty basic dry fly, and you can tie it in sizes right down to 16s and 18s. But I'm going to tie it today in a 12 so you can see a little better. I'm going to get a standard Mustad 101 dry fly hook. Do the good thing here, pinch down the barb.
Can you highlight yourself?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Where is it? Spotlight. There we go. That should do it. Let's make it a little easier to see. So we'll scrunch the barb down with my flat nose pliers. And put them in the vise exposed point because you don't have a lot of shank to work with when you're doing these small flies. The thread is said to be tan or beige. I've tied one in yellow and one in tan. I like the tan a little better. You don't see a lot of the thread actually. So we'll start the thread just a little bit behind the eye. And the way I saw it done a couple of different ways getting started this thing, and with a little experimenting, I found out what works good. I will run this thread back to about a third of the way along the shank. And at that point, I'm going to put in the wing first. I talked a little bit earlier with Florin and Company about what to use. The pattern calls for wood duck, but I didn't have any wood duck. So the alternatives are teal flank or a mallard flank. And I like the lighter colored mallard flank one. So I'm going to make the wing out of mallard flank. And so I cut pulled off all the fluff off the bottom. And what I'm going to do is pull a section off of each side of this mallard flank. And I'll even the tips up as best I can and pull it free of the stem. Lay that down on the table for a moment. And I'm going to pull an equal from the opposite side and even those tips out as best I can. Pull that off. And then I'll put the two together. And that just gives me a good chunk of mallard flank in one piece. And then what you do is you hold them sort of by the tips and the tail, and you roll them around a little bit. And what this does is it separates the fiber, or it keeps the fibers from being stuck together. And you can kind of even them up so all the tips are even. And that gives you a sizable chunk of fibers to put on the hook. Now, I want the wing to be about shank length, the whole length of the hook above I want a fairly tall wing, in other words. So I'll measure it against the eye of the hook to the bend and lay it on where the thread is. And then I will wrap a loose wrap over top to sit that stuff on top of the hook. And a couple more wraps. And then I'll just wrap back about halfway, trim that off. That helps build a little bulk for the thorax that you're going to wrap the quill over. Then I come forward and lift this stuff up, and I will wrap in front of it. Now I got a little too small. Let me do this again. I didn't get enough mallard flank, because what I want to do with this is I want to divide the wing, and I don't have anywhere near enough material. So make sure I have enough here. Give me just a minute. Not sure why it didn't come up together. Here we go. That's a little better. That's more substantial. I want to divide this wing, so back up to the wing position. Measure it. Wrap it down. Turn it off. Give it a couple more wraps, and then stand it up. Now I need a fair amount of wraps here to stand it up. Now, if you have enough material, which I'm kind of a little bit almost short, what I'll do is divide them with a bodkin, and I'll run a couple of wraps in between from front to back. And then I'll take the other side and I'll run it from back to front. And then once again, stand them right up and build a little dam in front so that it holds those divided wings. You'll see now we've got a divided wing that's right over top of the hook shank. And at that point, I will wrap down all the way down to the halfway point. Now the pattern calls for a done hackle, and a done hackle is sort of like that, or in some of them are darker gray. So this is the lighter one, and I like the lighter color. And for the tail, I'm just going to use fibers from one of those hackles, and I'll pick a hackle it off the body of the fly, the neck, and I'm going to pinch off to the side a half a dozen of those fibers that are longer. You can see that they're a little hard to see, but see if I can get them a little closer. There you go. That's a little better contrast. And what I'll do then is I will measure them shank length and pin them down with the butts sticking forward a bit. I'll come back and trim those later. And then wrap down the shank till it's right at the bend. Now I'll just get in here and I'll trim off the little bits, tie down what's sticking up. Okay, bring my thread up right behind the wing again. Now for the body, they recommend a stripped peacock quill. So this is what it looks like. It's ends up being just the quill, and to get there, you can do two ways. You can do it. You lay it down on your board, your front of your desk, and you use a little spit and an eraser, and you just rub it along there, and that will take the fuzz off the quill. Online, one of the guys did it differently. He again wet it down a little bit, and then used this guy and drew it down the quill flat. And I tried both methods. I like the eraser method a little better. And then what you normally do with this is you tie it in right behind the wing, wrap your thread down, and then back forward again. And what that builds is a nice smooth underbody. And then you wrap your quill forward. Now I'm going to use something that you can see a little better, and this is good for all quill flies. I have a package. You can get them in different colors of these guys, which is quill bodies, and they're basically a hackle that has been stripped partway up the hackle. And to use these, because the quills are a little thicker, and that's why I want to use it here so you can see how it wraps. But they're stiff and they're a little brittle. So before you use them, you have to soak them for a couple hours. So I get a little flat dish here that I've had these things soaking in for a while. And that renders them nice and soft. So now there's my stripped quill that I'm going to use. This one's kind of a brownish color. And I will take, they leave this little bit for you on to handle with, but I'm going to take it off. So I just snip the handle at the end because I want it to go. I'm going to lay it down here onto the hook shank and wrap it in on the near side of the hook. Wrap my thread down the hook shank. And I've used the fine end because this is a tapered quill. I've tied the fine end in behind the wing. And then I'll wrap my thread back up right behind the wing again. You can see now I've got a little bit of a tapered underbody, not much of a tapered bit. Now what's going to add to the taper is the fact that by tying it in by that quill in by the tip, the quill is tapered. So when I grab it with my hackle pliers, and to make this easy, because I have a rotary vise, I'm going to move, just tie a little half hitch in front of the wing. Get that on there. Come on, fingers are not working well this morning. Bring my bobbin rest up, and to get nice wraps. I'm doing this to get nice even wraps, and then I will wrap this in touching turns up the body of the fly. And what this does is it gives you a finely segmented body. And the reason I did it with the quill is because that color and the width of the quill stands out until it breaks. Hey, it's going to be one of those days, guys. Let me try that again. I was smart enough to have two quills ready. That's one of the problems with them. They tend to be a little brittle. And the Peacock are just as bad. So back to the back. Tie it in. Get back to the back. The only reason for tying the half hitch is it keeps the thread from wrapping around uncontrolled at the front of the fly. There we go. All right, once more with feeling. We will wrap the quill. So wrap that up the shank of the hook, and you can see there you get a nicely segregated body. And then when I get right behind the wing, I'll bring it up, bring my thread back behind the wing, underneath, and then wrap over top of it. Two or three good solid wraps on that quill. On the other side, so you wrap in front and behind, and that cinches the quill in place. Make sure those wings are up. So there we have it. We have, let me see if I've got a little better background here. I don't know. This might make it a little easier to see. You can see the segmentation. Now, the next thing is I need my hackle. I've picked a reasonably good sized one here somewhere. There we go. I don't want too long a hackle. That one's about right. And I'm not going to need a whole lot of it, so I just strip back the stem a little bit, cut it, and you'll see I've got the stem here is just sticking out. What I want to do with this is just snip a little bit on either side of the stem. And what that does is that leaves, and I'll try and do this so you can see it. It leaves a little bit of short barbules sticking out on either side of the stem there. And that keeps the hackle from pulling out when I start to wrap it. So stick that in behind the wing. A couple of wraps behind, a couple of wraps in front, and leave my thread hang just behind the eye. And then wherever I put my hackle pliers, there. And I will wrap some wraps in behind the wings. Want to make sure the wings are in front of where I'm wrapping that. That's a very long hackle for me, but I didn't find the other ones. So there we go. And then pull the wings back and pull the hackle back a little bit and wrap in front. When I get enough hackle material on there, I will come up and wrap in front of the wing and behind the eye, and behind the hackle, and then in front of it to make sure it doesn't come undone. And come down with my scissors and just use the edge of my scissors to snip the stem off. Pull it all back with my fingers and build a very small head, making sure I'm not plugging the eye, and then whip finish. Yeah, like Florence, I'll do 2, and that way I don't need to put glue in, which might clog the eye up. Get in there and up the mess. Capture a few of those there. And there you go. There's your Quill Gordon. That hackle is a little on the long side for the size of the hook. I could probably, because I have a decent neck, I could probably have picked a little shorter hackle. Anyway, so that's the first one. That's a Quill Gordon. And this one's maybe a little better proportion, but pretty close. Hackle's a little long on the one I just tied. And those are a standard Catskill scowl dry fly. They stand up pretty well. They stay dry. They're nice and light. And I fished equivalents of those in various colors and stuff over the years, and they seem to work pretty well for if you get a small mayfly hatch. They work pretty well. So that's pattern number 1. Any questions or comments? We'll put me off a spotlight for a moment.
What were the wings material choices?
Okay, so the material choice, the pattern calls for wood duck, but I've used done them with Mallard flank, and again, all you're doing is taking two batches. You can actually tie it in this way, but then it makes it, because the stem's in the middle, it makes it hard to separate them, which is why I pull it off in two bunches. And the same thing with this guy. This is a teal. And so I just pull off enough to make a reasonable sized bunch on either side, because they have different curves. And so if you mix the two different curves together after you've cut them off the stem and then kind of twist them around, it makes an even bunch of fibers that you can split into one wing on either side. Now, some guys can tie that just as a post. You could potentially, if you don't want to split the wings, you could just tie it up as a post and just use one batch of feathers. Okay. Second one is the spruce fly. And that's him there. Let's get back to spotlight here. So that's the spruce fly. And supposedly a good cutthroat fly on the West Coast. I've used them in Alberta and they do work pretty well. So materials for this guy are pretty straightforward. The other one, that was like 3 materials and you have a fly. And this one, it's a little more complicated. The first thing we're going to need is a tail. And the tail is Peacock sword that comes out like that. The body is red floss. The rib is fine gold wire. And the wing is this guy here. And that's called a badger hackle. And badgers have a dark center with a light edge. And the trick is getting the right hackles and trying not to, when you tie the actual hackle on in the front, try to pick one that's got relatively soft fibers, because you don't want it to stick out too hard. And unfortunately, this particular hackle has got a lot of very stiff fibers on it. So I've been pissing around trying to find the ones that are a little bit softer in the butt end from the very base of the hackle. So this would be a good one that's nice and soft in here to make a soft hackle, because the wings are badger hackle as well. So we'll get started. I'm using a hook box is here. You can tie them on really long hooks, and I've got one here that this one was tied like on a size 8 4X. And I found that a little bit long, and a little proportion is not quite right. So I'm going to tie it on a number 8 3X long. So it's not quite so long. And that's just a standard straight shank mustad wet fly hook, streamer hook. And it will bend the barb down. First, stick them in the vise. And the thread for this is black 8/0. And again, we will start this guy at the front. And I'm going to wrap the whole, do what we call dress the entire shank. Because when I wrap these floss bodies, it's nice to have a nice solid base that keeps the floss from twisting around the shank or slipping around the shank. And it makes it easier to wrap a tapered body with the floss. So I'll get back just to the point of the hook. And right at where the barb was before, I'm going to wrap 3 or 4 wraps over top each other to build a little bump. hang the thread in front of the bump. Then I'll take some fibers from this Peacock sword, and I probably only need 4 or 5. Can pull them off the stem. And they have a bit of a curve to them when you pull them off like that. See, they curve up. So I'll place this on the stem so that you're about the gap width behind the bend. Hold it with the left hand and cinch that down. Now just get in here and trim off the curly bits where I pulled it off the stem. Makes it easier to tie this down. And wrap forward so that I've got a nice smooth tie-in point. I'm going to wrap up to about 2 or 3 eye widths behind the eye and get my fine gold wire off the spool. And so that's what that is. That's just fine gold wire. And I'll tie it in right there at the front. And once again with this, I'm going to wrap all the way down the hook, trying to keep the underbody relatively smooth. Allows me to control the taper of the body. And when I get back there, I pulled the wire over onto the far side of the hook as I go down, so that when I take my first wrap, the first wrap is going to be underneath the hook shank. Bring my thread back up to where I tied everything in. And then use my floss. See, Roman, we're using your little bead thing. I've got a few left to use, so I can swap them from floss to floss as I need to. Lay that down on the hook shank. Again, with these particular threads, you have to, after you've wrapped the shank like that, multiple racks, it tends to unwrap the twist in the thread, and it will go kind of flat on you and won't really bite down properly. So I've got that, and I will wrap this again all the way down the hook shank, nice and smooth. And then spiral back up and trim the excess at the front. Always trim on top of the hook. That way your bobbin doesn't end up on the floor. And once again, because I can make a more controlled body, I'm going to do a half hitch right behind the eye and get my bobbin rest up. Now, the trick with this floss is that it does go flat if you watch. When I first start the wrap, you'll see it start to spread out. And as I wrap it up, you'll see it tightens up a bit. So every once in a while, I got to make a counterclockwise turn on the spool to keep it spread out. Otherwise, you end up with a really tightly wrapped So I'm going to just try to keep that thread, that floss, spread out a little bit where it attaches, right where it attaches to the hook. And take it up. And then I'll wrap back. And you see how if I don't twist that thing, it spreads out a little more. You can see that. And I'll take that back. I want to untwist that so that it does stay spread out a bit. and that's clockwise. And then as I bring it forward, I will keep doing the same thing and wrap the wraps just a little closer together, even though it's spread out. So you get a little overlap as you do this. And what that allows you to do is build a slightly tapered body from the back to the front. So that you end up with a red floss body that's a little fatter at the front than at the back. Oh. And then I'll take my thread over the top. And then on the near side, over top, front, and trim it down. So that's the underlying body, nicely, relatively smooth and nicely tapered. And then I'll bring my thread again about 3 eye widths back behind the eye. And I'll get some Peacock Herl, because I want to make the front half of the body is out of Peacock Herl. Oh, sorry, before we do that, I almost forgot. I got to wrap the rib forward. So I'll just make a few nice, evenly spaced wraps up with the wire rib. Bring that up, and again, tie it off in the same place. Let's see if I can get this thing to twist off. Come on. There we go. So Peacock Herl. I get three strands out here. And put them together. Trim the tips off. And then right there, about 3 eye widths behind, I will tie them down. And I will wrap back over top of the Peacock Herl to about 1/3 of the way down the shank. Bring my thread forward and leave it right at the eye. And then I'll wrap all 3 Peacock Herls. As I wrap them, I will give them a little twist. And I'll build this front half of the body, or the back half of the thorax. And when I get there, I'll tie it down. Left, back, and front. And trim them off nice and close. And then I'll need my hackle. And for that, I think I showed you I selected a hackle that's relatively soft and not too long. And I will strip that away from the stem, expose about 1/8 of an inch of stem, and lay that down there and tie it in. Good. Untwist the thread. Ah, that one pulled right out, right off the bat. That time I just bent the exposed stem back a little bit to make it stay where it belongs. And once again, we'll get the hackle pliers. And I tied that in with the intensely colored side facing me, so the curve of the hackle faces away. And that way, when I wrap around the hook shank, I can stroke the feathers of the hackle backwards, so that the curve of the feather goes to the back, which is typically how you tie a wet fly hackle. almost folded. And I don't want it to be too robust to hackle, just a few turns. And then wrap just behind the eye. And once again in front. There's a few stray hackle fibers there that I'm gonna use my thumb and 2 fingers to stroke them back so that it tapers to the back. And then I'll wrap over the front to try and force them back into that splayed position to the back. What that does is that collapses them back in a wet style hackle, and it creates a spot there for me to put the wings, which are also Badger Hackle. And I've gone through my hackles to try and find ones that are wide enough. Unfortunately, this particular hackle is a little bit too good. And it's got too much long, skinny hackle fibers. And so I'm trying to find ones that are not so, there we go, that one will do it, that have some width. This is a particularly high quality neck, and you can see how long and skinny those are. What I really wanted was more like not a saddle, but a neck that has some broader bits. So I'm gonna, because I'm gonna tie these on the side. So what I've got is a hackle that is going to be tied to the side of the hook, just by the stem of the hackle. And I will measure them so that it extends well past where the peacock sword is. I'd say about the length of the peacock sword past where it ends. And then I will come in here and pull back the bits so that I can expose the stem, and do the same thing to get the correct length. I'll trim that off, and I'll do what I did with the other hackle, because it's going to be tied in by the hackle stem on only a few wraps. I will go in beside the hackle stem and trim on either side of the stem to create that little fuzzy bit there. And because these hackle fibers stick out, it will tend to push the wing away from the body. So what I'm going to do is turn it on its side, and I'm going to go in here with my scissors and snip some of these hackle fibers right down close to the peacock. And then I'll lay this hackle stem down right where the thread is, and hold it with my thumb while I capture the stem. And I'll try to place it by holding it there and wrapping a few times, so that that hackle stem has the dark side facing me and is twisted so that the dark color is on the outside. Then I'll turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. I'll trim that little bit of hackle out so that it doesn't push it away from the body of the fly. And take my hackle again, I'll measure it compared to the other one and pull it back. Just double check the length, it might be a little long. And trim that up. And once again, pull it out so I can trim either side of the stem. It's those little barbules that help keep that from being pulled out. And I'll set that down right on the hook, parallel to the shank. Wrap it down. And there we go. So we now have 2 of those, one on either side. One's a little longer than the other. Well, close enough. And I will give a good wraparound to build a bit of a head here. And then whip finish. Oh, did you pull out? Yes, it did. Rats. Ooh, what do you know? Missed the stem. Let's try that once more. This time I'll get it the correct length. That was a little too long. So we'll trim it up. Once more. Must have missed the stem the first time around. Got it that time. There we go. And we're finished. And those are closer to the same length. My fingers are really fumbling today. How is it that my whip finisher is getting all wrapped up here? There we go. I can easily do it by hand, so I can place it better. There we go. One more. So we'll just use a little moisture and squish it a little bit with my fingers to sort of get those wings to sit a little bit closer in and right down on top of the hook. There we go. So there's your spruce fly with the splayed hackles. And of course, this is going to create a little disturbance as it's pulled through the water. These things are going to want to spread out and go down. So I think that's the reason for the way that particular stuff has been done. Okay, so we will stop share spotlight. And we are done. So there we go.
That's an interesting fly, Dave.
Yeah. I think
Super long wing.
The original photograph showed them with, if I get it out of the book, you'll see that the wing is very long, but it's also, they've used I think maybe like a hen hackle because it's very broad.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Now, so this is what I had. So, but I think the general idea is that broad wing and the dark with the white gives it a bit of a small bait fish profile, and the ability for these things to move, I think, is part of what would make this an effective fly. So there we go. We'll do the stop recording here.